Hi, Zoe. We're gonna take a look at your first couple of postings for the class and give you a little bit of observational feedback here. So go ahead and screen share and get to looking at what we have here. All right, this is so first thing that I like to do is just essentially take a look at the overall posting to see where you are in terms of following the instructions. Did you sort of work through the process that was outlined for you in the manner that you're being asked to? This is not a small thing. This is an important part of any kind of creative project, because there's going to be parameters that are laid out for you where a client or a patron or a collaborator needs a particular thing done from us, and we need to be able to do that under certain guidelines. The creativity happens within those certain guidelines. So that's why I tend to have some sort of formal sort of process treatment in these courses. Even at the 400 level, we talk a lot about the process, and the students themselves will start to form those before we start to work. But always you're going to have some kind of objective or some sort of formal structure from which you're going to work in the professional world. So it does look like you've been doing that. Man, I think so far, this is probably as far back as I've seen anybody do the first shot. This is great. This is a really good example. You really took to heart the idea of in the environment. You took the idea that this is supposed to be the environment with a building in it, not the other way around. So excellent. I think I'm actually going to use this image as an example when I show future students what I'm talking about in the environment, because you did a wonderful job here. Even though the image is a little dark, the perspective that you're using here works 100%. I think you did a great job with that first image. Now, let's kind of move back. You did kind of put yourself in a position, though, because you're so far back. We have to then figure out what do we do next, because you're then having to, looks like, almost use your zoom lens to get you closer, because there's a lake in front of you. And that put you in an awkward position. So while this one is like awesome, this one is restricted because you really didn't have any choice but to just kind of zoom in or something to get any closer. So it's funny. I can kind of tell a lot of times how things were made after looking for a long time at photographs. You'll be able to do that if you're into photography. If you start to do that, you'll start to be able to figure out certain things about photographs, whether they're zoom or whether they're wide angle and that kind of stuff. Not that it matters. So as we continue to get closer, again, it doesn't exactly appear that we cut the distance in half and in half again. And part of that has to do with the fact that you're using this focal length lens. You're altering the distance. You're bringing the subject closer to you rather than you getting closer to the subject. And there's a big difference between those two things. And so what I want us to focus on is you getting closer to the subject. The camera is always just an extension of your vision. You don't want the camera to be dictating the way you see, and we don't see in a zoom fashion. We don't see that way. And so we want the camera to simply and purely record what you see. And so by moving ourselves close, we are more accurately able to allow the camera to just capture what's in front of us, what we see, rather than the camera showing us something that we don't have the ability to see. There's a difference there. Now, I'm not saying that the other is a bad thing, to have the camera and taking advantage of the technology. That's just a different thing that we're doing. So there we are. Now that we're across the river or the lake, now you're back into where we're not having to use that zoom anymore. And now you can see the quality of the images seem to look a little bit better as well. And you're able to then navigate and move around and that kind of stuff a little bit better as also and explore. So you got kind of restrictive. As wonderful as that first shot was, it kind of puts you in a spot where it was hard for you to really move around. Now, what are we taking a picture here of, right? When we are looking at these images, here you've got texture, right? And you've got the texture here, but the focus ends up being on the text. Be really wary of what your viewer is going to pick up on when you're making images, whether it's drawing or painting or photography or whatnot. There are certain things that your viewer is always going to be drawn to. And if we include them in our imagery, we have to know that the viewer is going to pick up on those. Use those to your advantage. Be careful of them if they are not what you want to emphasize. So if our intent in the photograph here was to emphasize texture, including the text here is the wrong direction. We don't want to move in that direction, because what we want is the viewer to pay attention to this texture here, if that's what you want us to pay attention to, which we're saying this is about texture. We want to see the texture primarily, not the text. Text will always draw us from it. A person's eyes or a face, a human being, that will draw us away from stuff that the viewer is going to want to go to that. So we can use stuff like that to emphasize or de-emphasize. For instance, if the text was the thing that had the texture on it, if West Tower had this beautiful sort of granular structure and the rest of it, everything was just smooth, that would be a great choice to make, because you know that we're going to look at the text, and the text is littered with the textures that you're trying to highlight. See, that's the kind of thing that we're looking at. Hope this is helping you. All of this is observation, has nothing to do with criticism. It's all about looking at things and how we can take an image that is good and improve it. This is a really interesting perspective. You're taking to heart the idea of how I see it. You're moving in, you're so close, we can't even see what we're actually seeing here or viewing. It's a tough thing to try to do. It's an advanced thing to try to do. In this project, a lot of what I'm observing, a lot of what I'm hoping to see from the entire class as a whole is where everybody is. Just what level are we talking about here? Because the students, all you guys are in different levels. You're coming from different perspectives, different backgrounds, different experiences. Some of you have worked with cameras for a long time. Some of you have never had a camera beyond your phone. So everyone has that, and I'm, seeing how each of you approaches these different components to this very first project allows me to sort of gauge the level of the entire class, so that I'll know how to pitch the level a little bit better to everyone. So this last image and the first image, I think, are really excellently done, really, really well done. Some of these others are a little bit less confident almost in what you're doing. And then, of course, what we talked more about what the zoom lens does for you. But man, this one, congratulations on that one. That one's really good in terms of in the environment. Let's take a look at your rule of thirds now. Let's see, where did I see that one? Did I pass it? Emphasis, 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 balance, balance. Rule of thirds. I know we're here. Yeah, there we are. Rule of thirds. Okay, so let's continue to sort of look through here. This is a nice use of the rule of thirds. I think it works really well. You're using these two posts, not in the literal sense, because one is closer and one's farther away. It doesn't give us the sense that you are knocking us over the head with the rule of thirds, but you are placing them in those spots. You've got this line, which is kind of creating that balance right at the rule of thirds. It's a really good job. Again, starting us off with with a really good image. Whoop, 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 whoop. What's going on? My mouse is going crazy. This next image, while you've got these ducks, they're sort of placed. I like that you did not include anything in the center. That's a good thing. It's not formally, I wouldn't say this is a great example of the rule of thirds. You're incorporating what you could with the structure. But if I were to say, show us some rule of thirds, this wouldn't be something that I would pick necessarily. Now, you are using it in a way that is helpful, but I wouldn't say this is a really good example of it. Now, this is a better one because you are using that line, which is placed in a good spot, the vertical. See, these are good examples of it, and some are using the principle, but it's not really an example of it. What's a benefit is that I am aware of your understanding of it by some of your other images. The lighting on this one is fantastic. The light that you're capturing off of the frozen lake here, it's a little broad right here in terms of the lighting is a little bit harsh right here. If I put my hand over this object right here, you can't see what I'm putting my hand over. If I put my hand over this pole here, which I know why you put it there because you needed a vertical in there, but if I cover this up, my eyes go way deep into the composition. With this here, what happens is it's got this texture and it's got this brightness and it's got this detail and it's got all this business that's happening over here. It's almost like putting a hand up. Notice what happens when I put my hand like this, right? It's saying stop, don't go any further into the composition. When it's taken away, suddenly you're able to get back into the composition a little bit better. The difference is this versus that. So these are subtle things that can help you with your compositions. Oh, this is very good. This is very good. A little bit underexposed. This is a tough exposure to do because you got such a bright background and such a dark foreground, but you handled it fairly well, or your camera handled it fairly well. A little bit of manual control will go a long way to correcting this as well as you get even more comfortable with your camera. This perspective is a difficult one. I think you might have been better off if you were to had excluded some of this business here. But again, you're using the line work fairly well. It's not, again, a great example of the rule of thirds, but you're using the principle how you can use it. So there's a difference between using the principle and showing us effective examples of the principle. And so we want a little bit of both here. We want you to use it effectively, but in this project itself, I am interested in that you're showing me effective examples of it so that I understand your understanding of it. So I'm clear that, okay, Zoe knows what the rule of third is, what that principle is all about, so that if you needed to use it very formally, very, very rigidly, you'd know how to. It looks like you do. It looks like you do, but it also looks like you like to kind of break it up with compositions that you find inspiring or interesting. You got a lot of line work going on here. And again, this one's a real challenge to do because of all the lines that you have. The difficult part of making an image that has this much line work is the perspective of your camera. So when your camera is even aimed up just a little bit. So if I have an object here and I have the camera here, and the camera is tilted just a little bit like this, right? So the camera is straight on to the object. If it's tilted just like this, just a little bit, you're going to get what you have here, which is called a keystone, which is where it tilts in just a little bit. You're not getting a huge amount because your camera isn't tilted that much. But because you have so many geometric lines going on, from the window panes to the doors to the insets here of the doors, all of that stuff, the subtle sort of shifts that go on in that, it makes it really difficult. And the key to making an image like this is perfection, is it has to all be perfectly aligned. Kind of image like this is much more difficult than some of the other images where you don't have all of this. This kind of image, while it looks really simple to be able to make, takes a long time because you have to have the tripod set up and you have to have the camera at a certain angle and you have to adjust it very carefully so that the lines, and sometimes you even have to create almost an optical illusion to be able to get the lines to straighten up just exactly where it is. Otherwise, you wind up looking like a kind of a strange like lines are falling into each other and all of that. It's a trick of the eye. It's not really, your eyes will correct for it. Our brains are really good at making sense at stuff that isn't straight on and geometric, but cameras can't do that. Cameras just record whatever's in front of you. So while this is a really good photograph, it's a far more difficult photograph to make exactly perfect than what most people think. Very simple. A graphic designer will love you for this photograph, by the way, because you're leaving plenty of space for the use of their elements. When you're working with a designer or an illustrator or whatnot, and you have parameters where you know they're working in a certain thing, like let's say this is a magazine page, and you know that there's going to be this is where it's going to fold, and you make an image exactly like this, they're going to love you for it, because they know that they have all of this side to be able to run their body copy and their headline, and then you won't have to worry that they're going to mess up your image. Now, is this a great example of rule of thirds? No, it's not, because there's no real placement here for the rule of thirds. A good image, yeah, I think it's a great image in terms of stock photography for graphic arts. But as far as an example of rule of thirds, it's just not hitting on those points. And this does a pretty good job here, because you're using the line here and over here. So I think you've got a few hit and misses here. I think you're exploring and you're experimenting, which is always good. I would much rather see you doing that than have you be super safe and all of that kind of stuff. It's clear that you have a point of view. It's clear that you are comfortable with your camera and that you're able to move around and make images that are satisfying to you. Following the instructions don't seem to be too much of a problem. I just think I would suggest making a lot more photographs. However many you made, you may have made a ton of them, make more. The more photography that you do, the more opportunity you're going to have to make excellent photographs. I think I might have mentioned that the success rate somewhere, probably think of it as at around 10%. So if you need 20 photographs, you need to make at least 200 photographs. If you need 50 photographs, you need 500 photographs. So at your stage, your success rate might even be lower than that. Maybe your success rate is maybe even 5% of your photos are going to be usable. So that means if you want to have 5 images, then you're going to need to make 100 photographs. So that's the kind of exploration that you need in order to work through some of these things. And it's a lot of images, but the wonderful thing about working today is it doesn't cost you anymore to continue to shoot, only time. We have this entire, these 5 days with each of these experiments. So typically you'll be able to spend as much time as you need on each one. So that's what I have for you. I think you're well on your way to making better and better images, and I look forward to seeing more of them. All right, we'll see you in class. Bye-bye now.